Hi everybody, welcome to class with Professor Mead, your reluctant YouTube professor. Today we're going to be talking about reading articles, synthesizing your research, and writing your lit review. So over the past week or two, you've probably spent quite a bit of time online doing research through your school's website, talking to the librarian, reading, trying to read through articles and piece them together in an attempt to find your amount of articles that you need to be able to compare and contrast with each other. So what we're going to do in this particular lecture is talk about how we go about doing that. So once you have your articles, the process of reading, synthesizing, and writing your lit review begins. And that means that you're going to be taking a lot of time to kind of go through these articles, see what they're about. So remember that our goal is to become an expert on our particular topic, not to, in essence, collect the articles or look like you have the most articles or even look like you've completed the workbook. The process of knowing your topic makes every other step in the research process possible. Not just easier, but it's almost impossible to do your research if you don't have a core idea of the actual research that's out there, that's going on. So this is not a step that you can skip or pretend like you do. And I say that every single class, every single semester. But every semester, lo and behold, people try to skip doing the research process and reading the articles. I know it's tedious, I know it's boring, I know it's not the funnest thing you need to do, but it's your foundation and you need it. If you want to do research, you need to be knowledgeable about the topic. So one of the ways that we talk about a lit review is we compare it or contrast it to a bibliography. So an annotated bibliography is simply a summary of one article with its citations and then a summary of a second article with its citation. So you could say, I'm going to summarize, this is what Anderson has to say on social capital, and this is what Jones has to say on social capital, and this is what Martinez has to say on social capital. That's an annotated bibliography if you put the annotations and the citations in with it. A literature review combines all of those things. And that means that you're going to say, this is what Martinez and Jones had to say, which is different from what Anderson has to say. So you're talking about all of them together in one particular literature review, which is what you're doing. So essentially there are three main types or typical organizations for literature reviews. One, or organizational styles is what you would call it. The first one is a summary of major points, which means you're essentially going through all of the points one by one and summarizing them. Or it can be three main parts corresponding to three main tasks involved in explication, which means that there are main components and tasks of the way that you're formatting, and it helps to explain, compare, and contrast. We'll go over this in detail in just a second. And then, of course, there's comparing and contrasting. So, summary of major points. What you're doing here is you're identifying all of the author's main points and you're synthesizing what all of them have to say in terms of their main points. And you're deriving all of that information from primary sources, which is something that we talked about last week, how to identify a primary source. And so the organizational style breaks down like this. You assert a claim of fact, which means you're making an assertion that something is real and factual. You summarize the author's main points. You provide the evidence for those points. In other words, you say, this is what Anderson, Jones, and Martinez have to say, and here is how they said it, right? So you give the example or the evidence, which would be summarizing, paraphrasing what they have to say. You don't want to use quotes. That's on a lower level. That's something we would expect maybe junior high, high school students. Now you should paraphrase what 2 or 3 authors have to say, not just one at a time. explain your evidence and then repeat that cycle again and again. So it's a little bit of a repetitive style, but this is kind of the foundation for the next style. So what it should remind you of that 5th grade essay that you wrote where you have an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. And so your introduction is going to identify the most important points. I'm going to talk about A, B, and C. And then in the body of the literature, you're going to summarize A, give the evidence or paraphrase the researchers who said A, and then explain why that evidence, that paraphrase, is really decent or logical evidence that supports the main argument of fact that you're making. In other words, you're going to make an argument of fact, you're going to make a claim of fact, you're going to support it with evidence, which is the paraphrasing from what the authors have to say, and then you're going to tell me in your own words why that is good evidence, why you think it's logically linked. And then you're going to repeat that for all of your main points. There should be usually 2 to 5 in a small research lit review like this. Once you're done, you're going to integrate those main points into the discussion of the main points as kind of a conclusion, but it's not telling or retelling what you're going to say. You are connecting those points all together, and usually in sociology we connect that, and also in addition to that add an analysis through theory. So in Intro to Theory you might have learned that you start with theory. In other words, you use theory to kind of start, this is the question I have, I think this might be a social problem framed from this perspective. You do your research, and then when you come back and you're doing your lit review, for example, you're going to analyze what everybody else has to say from the lens of a theorist, not from your lens. And so that offers you a form of objectivity, so you're going to be less biased because you're going to look at it from the perspective of a theoretical perspective or a particular theorist. The next one is the more advanced one, and it's called 3 main parts corresponding to 3 main tasks in explication. So the first one, or the first part and task, is a summary. Synthesis, describe the author's main points. So what you might realize with that, Wolfgang, shush, shush. He's barking at an avocado, just so that you know. It's important. So you're doing essentially the first type that I was talking about in the last page. Then you do an analysis. So that's a second level layered upon your first level. And what you're doing here is you're synthesizing and you're explaining the polemical context. So what does polemical context mean? It means you're explaining, or you're criticizing, or you're synthesizing the arguments, the way that they are constructing those arguments, that type of thing. And then level 3 is an evaluation, assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the author's arguments, their evidence, methods. So what you're doing at this level is you're analyzing their methodology. Is their qualitative or quantitative methodology sound? Do they have any weaknesses in it? Do they have any weaknesses in their argument? That type of thing. So that one is the more advanced one, and that is one that we would expect maybe graduate students to do. So you would probably start with, this is Pasha, she's 9. You would probably start with the three main synthesizing points. That's where you are at your level. You should be learning that as a freshman, sophomore in college. And then by the time you reach graduate school, you should be able to do an analysis of the methods and those types of things. So the last one is comparing and contrasting. This is an old school one. You probably did this in high school, grade school, and that's when you're taking the main points, the polemical context, the assumptions, the evidence, and you're comparing and contrasting the weaknesses and the strengths. So it's kind of another take on the second one. So you would be not just comparing and contrasting main points or ideas, but also the arguments, the way that those arguments are made, and the methods and the way that those methods are made. So this one, I tend to avoid myself. Some people really like it, but I find that I'm not able to organize this one in a way that I find is kind of that strong organizational style that we tend to favor in scientific research. Okay, so for sound's sake, because I have a ton of sound going on, I'm holding Wolfgang now. So for the purposes of your workbook, what you're going to be doing is the first organizational style, which is the summary of 3 main points. It's challenging in and of itself, so I think it's a good place to start as undergrads. Okay, cool. So let's talk about reading the article. Reading articles is the preparation for the lit review. The more you read the articles, the more you take notes, the more you are involved in trying to understand the research and what the experts on the topic have to say, the better off you're going to be the entire time that you are doing this class or any particular research. If you get into the methods or the statistics and you haven't read what the other experts have to say, you're completely lost. And so even though you're learning new statistics and it's not exactly what you're seeing, let's go down then. No barking, no talking. You want to make sure that you allow yourself that strong foundation, even though it's not very fun. But I'm going to give you a strategy for doing it. So let's look at how we should actually read an article. You just continue to do that cycle until you have found your total number of articles for the class. Read, once you've done that, print your articles. Read your printed articles. You notice in highlights I keep pushing this because it's super important. Take notes as you read. Look for common themes, context, assumptions, evidence, findings. Look for things that repeat themselves. If you feel like you're reading almost the same article over and over again, awesome, you're doing a great job. You have essentially found articles that match each other. If you have an article that you love and has research that you're really interested in, and you're having a hard time finding another article that's like it, there is a gold mine of articles that are like it, and it's in the reference section of that particular article. So as you read through an article and you really, really like that article, take a browse through that reference or citation section and look for titles that might be the topic that you're interested in. Chances they're going to be really related because they have done the same work that you're doing now when they did their research article. Take that title, take the author, the citation, go back into your library resource center and pull those articles. Once you've done that and you have your articles, you want to also start filling this synthesis grid. I've created this for the ease of students so that it looks like it's in a grid. You can see clearly what your main themes are. You have your citations there. Everything should be creating itself, and your main ideas and themes will assert themselves. So here, again, I'm just kind of giving you steps, right? Read the printed articles, look for common themes, words, and ideas that repeat themselves, create and fill in the grid, decide what points are the strongest, and base those themes on based on themes, paraphrases, and cited evidence. Based on repetition found in your notes, write the points of claim of fact. So all that time that you were taking notes, you should have been seeing kind of a repeated theme that you're saying over and over again. So when you do that, you want to use that and paraphrase what you're seeing in all those articles at the top. I'm going to show you on the next slide, the top of the little box, and you're going to write your own sentence that paraphrases what all of them have to say. You're going to choose a theory. I would suggest something that you know that you learned in Social 101 and summarize it into a sentence for the thesis. So when you have your two main points in your thesis, social conflict asserts, or structural functionalism asserts A, B, and C, whatever, defines structural functionalism. And then social capital has three main components, or social capital strongly relies on social connections, familial connections, and academic connections, right? So you have those three main points within it. I'm asking you only to do two, though. So write a thesis with 2 points based on your theory and strongest evidence. I give you kind of a breakdown of how to do it. And then start plugging in the thesis points into the literature, organizing it, writing your support sentences, meaning you have a statement of fact, which is your thesis. Wolfgang, hush now, hush. And then you'll write, you already have your paraphrased information, and then you write your support. So your support is your support is your evidence. Your logic is why your evidence supports the thesis. So I'm asking you to tell me why you use that piece of paraphrased information to support the argument that you're making. Your thesis is the argument that you're making. Notice, though, that you looked for the evidence first and then you wrote the thesis. Do not write a thesis and then look for the evidence. You can write a master thesis. That doesn't mean the evidence is going to be there to support the argument that you're making. So look for the evidence the way that I showed you, right, by doing the grid, and then create a thesis that already supports the argument that you're making. Sounds like cheating, but it's not. It's just working with what you have and knowing the literature before you write a thesis. So, okay, so I have 4 themes here, right? These are the main themes that emerge from all or most of your articles that you were grouping, right? So maybe I had 10 articles. Here I'm only showing 2. Here I would put the citation for every, so this is my citation, and this is essentially the quotes or the paraphrased evidence for this particular article. So this is article A, this is article B, right? So article A says something about social capital increases academic success. Article A does not say anything about social capital being less of a predictor of academic success. Social capital does not say anything about connections to teachers in school and organizations is social capital, right? But you'll notice article B does. So article A and B both say strong family support is a form of social capital. Only article B says that connections to teachers and school organization is social capital. And then both A and B say friends are a form of social capital that can lead to either academic success or distraction, disassociation. These up here, the themes, these are my words. This is my language, the way I said it. This is my language for what the author had to say. So instead of a quote, you turn that quote or that information that the author has to say into your own words, and then you cite them. You give them the credit for the idea. At the top, though, it's your assertion. You're making a statement, a claim of fact, an assertion. You're making an argument. So this comes from you after you know the evidence. So this would look more like what it's supposed to look like. Here I give you paraphrase citation, DuPont, Jones, Linné, and Ritchie. So that would be, say, my citation number 1, and that particular citation A, right, I would write that here. That's how I would cite it. And then they talked about theme 1, and they also talked about theme 4. Article B talked about theme 1 and theme 3 and theme 4. So what I'm looking at when I'm done here is I'm trying to decide how strong the evidence is for a particular theme. Theme 1 is quoted in every single one of the articles, so I would say that that's strong evidence right here, so I'm deciding that's strong evidence. And then the moderate evidence, I have 4 articles talking about theme 3, so I would deem that moderate evidence. Both of these are useful, but say theme 2 and theme 4 I love, but I only have a tiny bit of evidence for theme 2 or theme 4. That sucks. Get rid of it, right? Sometimes it's hard. We get really emotionally vested in a particular idea, but that's not what the evidence has to say. And we can look for the findings, but we don't get to dictate what authors on the topic have to say. And the same thing with our research. When we develop a hypothesis, and the results are the results, right? No matter what we want them to be. If we want them to be, positive results, but they're negative, and we force positive, that's bias in research, that's unethical, and it's wrong, right? So I understand, how it feels, because we all go through it. We get vested in our research, but we have to follow the literature, and you want to follow the easiest path. Think about theme 1 as the big highway, and theme 3 as a large road, and theme 2 as a rocky mountainside road that's not even paved, right? It's going to be more difficult, slow going, and you're just going to be banging your head against the wall trying to write your literature review. Pasha, my lord. Oh, okay, guys, almost done with my husband's home. So in the previous example, we saw which theme was considered the strongest, right? Strong evidence, moderate evidence, or weak evidence. So you want to fill that in and make those decisions for yourself in your own synthesis grid. Once you finish doing that, you would determine the 2 or 3 themes, write them each as a claim of fact. Do not use passive language, ladies. I'm looking at you. Passive language is friendly, polite language. Could be, should be, might be, sometimes. That's all passive language. Whenever we use that friendly language when we're writing research articles, it comes off as we don't know what we're talking about. It's too loose, and you have to make really strong statements. So it needs to be direct statements, right? If you can yell it at somebody and it sounds right, then it's probably the correct type of writing language, right? It's the opposite of what we would do in friendly speech, especially the way women are taught to write. Honey, since you're in the video, say hi. So, an example, Americans who live in racially diverse communities support immigration policies, right? So that's a good example of a strong statement that doesn't have passive language. A thesis is always one sentence. A thesis never has passive language. So try to write in this format exactly, even color-coded, your thesis, your title sentences in blue, and your evidence, right? And then so you have actually most of it written, very extremely coded for you. Once you get this idea down, you can loosen up. But this is the theory behind how we write a lit review. We make the argument thesis-wise, and then we say the same thing in the title sentences, and then we give evidence from the articles as to why that argument that we're making is valid, because people are supporting us. Look, DuPont, Jones, Linnea, Ritchie all agree with me that Americans who live in racially diverse communities support open immigration policies. And then I can say why I think that is a good argument that supports, or that's good evidence that supports my argument. Okay, so next week's assignment is going to be the actual lit review. Before you do that, you're going to have to meet with me. This assignment for the lit review is going to be with your partner. You've already been assigned partners. So on a separate Word document, try to do the assignment that I'm teaching you. Now I have my laundry going. And then review your rubric and contact me through Remind if you need any help.